remember you, too. Maximilian de Robespierre. I remember your coronation speech. I remember the passion. I remember how it moved me. How did it go now? Let me see.
Please, no. I'm afraid I'm beginning to feel some embarrassment over that speech. Like everyone else, I was so full of hope for the new reign. So optimistic, then.
And now?
Now, quite naturally, I feel fear for the royal couple and for the whole of France.
How dare you criticize the crown, Monsieur de Robespierre? You, of all people.
Perhaps, with a little loud criticism, the crown will straighten itself out. Perhaps if enough of us raise our voices in protest, this country's wounds will start to heal.
Hello and welcome to Comic Book Movie Oblivion, the podcast about feature films based on comic books and comic strips that people have stopped talking about. We are your hosts, Jordan and Kumar, that's me.
And me.
And this week we are talking about Rose of Versailles, which...
Well, we're talking about Lady Oscar.
Lady Oscar, which came from Rose of Versailles. We'll be talking about both.
Indeed.
Pause the podcast. Weird on this one.
I always forget about this.
It's actually, I'm going to say you don't have to pause. I think there are some soap opera twists in the comic which we will spoil, but even though this is a relatively new edition, well, it took a very long time for this comic to come out in English. Came out a few years ago, I think maybe 5 years ago at the most, something like that. And it's already gotten a little bit hard to get a hold of again anyway.
Right.
So, I mean, I could say pause it and go read it.
You're not going to watch this film. And you may... and if you want to read the manga, it's kind of hard to get a hold of. So don't bother pausing the podcast.
Yes, and even if you could get it, as much as I love these Udon editions because they're beautiful hardcovers with like foil stamping on them and everything, they're pretty pricey. And if you wanted all of them, it's like $5 in the set. So
yep.
It's not... I've only got volume 1 because I don't have the money to buy the other 4 or can't even source them, which I kind of do want them, but they're hard to get a hold of.
So, carry on, man.
Okay, so Rose of Versailles is a historical fantasy. It started serialization, I think, in Margaret Magazine in May of 72.
Yep.
Completed in December of 73. So we're at the December 23rd, 73, the last episode of the original ran. So we're right at the 50th anniversary. It's amazing to think that, meanwhile, across the ocean, Howard the Duck was happening at the exact same time. Bizarre, but that's the weird world of comics that are growing in silos. So what we'll say about it's about the French Revolution and Marie Antoinette, specifically. It was created by Riyoko Ikeda, who was 27 years old at the time.
Amazing.
She was a member of the youth branch of the
Japanese Communist Party.
And she was also part of what was called the Year 24 group.
Right.
Which was about 10 or 12 female manga artists that were born in what was called Year 24, around Year 24, which was 1949 in Western terms. They were all born in a range, but somehow they all got called the Year 24.
24th year of the Showa Emperor.
That's right. So what happened was, up until this kind of turning point in the 70s of this movement which happened, of which Ikeda was a part of, shoujo manga, which is girls manga, which is a demographic that was targeting.
We have talked a little bit about shoujo manga before with my little sister, I think.
Oh, right, okay.
But
so
I've forgotten everything already.
Okay. So basically, before this, all of the shoujo manga was being produced by men, including Osamu Tezuka, who had a series called Princess Knight, which was really popular. But these women came in, and they were like, well, it doesn't have to be this dumb. So they kind of aged up the target audience of the stories a little bit, so we're now going more towards tweens instead of really little girls. There was also longer continuity stories, they weren't just short things, and also they started going into other genres like science fiction and horror.
And historical.
And historical, yeah. These were all things that started emerging at this time as the shoujo manga scene was becoming smarter, because this incredible talent pool suddenly appeared at the same time, and we're all working in there at the same time. Now, also a bunch of thematic things started to happen, so you start to get same-sex romances start appearing. both female and male is this kind of like idealized fantasy land, perfect romance kind of thing. There's a lot of gender bending that happens.
That happens in this one.
Androgyny comes up a lot. All those kind of things start to appear. The things that nowadays we'd say are really core tropes that come up in shoujo manga all the time were formed around this era, especially by this group of women. And also, some of them, especially Ikeda, had this art style, and I often feel like Ikeda's the quintessential stylist of this style, but in a sense she was the originator of it, or one of the originators
Sure,
of it.
because that would be my next question. I mean, is Ikeda the most influential of this group, and is Rose of Versailles kind of like the standard bearer for this change?
Feel like it, because when I think of like someone like Moto Hagio, her stuff was more, I don't know, it was more heady. I don't know if that's the right word. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in Rose of Versailles, because especially when you know that she's a member of the Communist Party.
Absolutely.
And you start reading this thing about Marie Antoinette, and it seems to be very sympathetic to Marie Antoinette in the first several hundred pages. And it seems like Ikeda's trying to get into Antoinette's head and figure out why this girl turned out the way she did. And why she became the type of queen that she became. And that to me was very interesting, because to me that was like an artist trying to understand the characters that she probably did not sympathize with in real life, or probably would have despised in real life. But she was like, I gotta figure this person out. Now, I've also heard online on the Wikipedia page suggests that her readers, those girls that were reading it, did not like Marie Antoinette.
Yes.
So she shifted focus to Oscar. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, because Oscar's right there in chapter 1.
Yes, true. I also read that in the... As you say, I can only go by what's on the Wikipedia page, but the Wikipedia page says that this was enormously popular manga.
Yeah,
like,
sold 20 million units, I think, of the 10 volumes or something.
Incredible. But also... It really kind of... Ikeda was responding to what readers were kind of saying and writing to her about the characters. So not only Marie Antoinette, but also Jean,
Yeah.
is a character who is in front of center in some of the earlier volumes, but who takes more of a back role, but sort of vanishes from the book after a while, and that is apparently because she wasn't popular with her readership, and hence the focus shifts more to Oscar and Andre, who's more or less introduced at that point. When Jian recedes into the background, Andre kind of comes into the foreground. But to return to your original point, I think at the start, because the very first line of the book is 3 people are born in 3 different places at these 3 dates. One is Marie Antoinette in Oscar. One is Axel Fersen, the Swedish aristocrat, who was rumoured to be Marie Antoinette's lover. Probably wasn't in real life. That was probably impossible. But the important thing is everyone believed it at the time. Oh yeah, it was very scandalous, her relationship with Fersen. And the last of all is Oscar Jagez, who is a girl raised as a boy.
Yes.
And I think, I don't know for sure, it's probably on the record somewhere, but I think Ikeda was probably going to do a love triangle. And she does kind of...
Oh, right, yes.
And there is there a bit.
It is there at the beginning, especially, yeah.
Yeah, she was going to kind of do a love triangle with the fall of the Ancien Regime as the backdrop, but then as the book went on, and as she presumably found it was going in different directions, and as she was responding to her readership, it changed a bit.
Yeah, okay. But then again, like with Jean disappearing from the scene, she does anyway, historically. Historically, some of these people just go off to nunneries or whatever, like Madame du Barry. It's like, of course she's not in the story past volume 2 or whatever. So it's hard to know how to place these things or what her plan was at the beginning. It's hard for me to imagine that Ikeda went in and planned for Marie Antoinette to be sympathetic through to the very end. Like, I have to imagine she had in her plans. She did 2 years of research apparently, but...
I believe it. And also, as you say, if she was a member of the Communist Party, or of the youth branch of the Japanese Communist Party, which means, and also I understand she read philosophy. She was doing graduate study in philosophy at a university in Tokyo before she dropped out to write the manga, where she was studying. I couldn't find a source for this, but it was on Wikipedia again. But she was studying Marxist-Leninism, or at least she would have been doing a philosophy degree. You would have been exposed to it in some way, shape, or form. So, if she's familiar with Marxism, she would have known about the French Revolution.
Yeah.
Because the French Revolution is really important to Marxists.
Right.
Not just because you have figures like Robespierre or Saint-Just or Gracchus Babeuf who are kind of proto-Marxists, but because the French Revolution is an example of the kind of the nature of history as class struggle, because it's the transition from a feudal circumstance to the bourgeois kind of capitalist world in which we live today. So if she'd done any, and Marxists are famously always reading and debating, so if she'd spent any time in this group, she would be absolutely familiar with the French Revolution.
Right.
So I completely have no trouble believing that she did an enormous amount.
Yeah, no, I'm somewhat familiar with the student scene in Japan from manga I've translated and stuff, and having to read about this stuff, and it was very active, like exactly like what you're talking about. It would have been hot debates all the time. Campus demonstrations were going on all the time. All that kind of stuff was happening. But we haven't really talked about the art yet, which that's where you started. Because it does seem like it's, in a sense, this is crack cocaine for little girls. It is wild. It is so extreme and heightened and elevated at all times. It never lets up. It is what people think of when they think of shoujo manga, is they think of this type of imagery.
So how to describe it? Everyone's shooting laser beams out of their eyes all the time.
Their eyes are huge, giant galaxy pools.
Yeah. And they're with the supernova going off in them.
Yes, backgrounds are either like they've got like completely flowers or sparkles are going on behind characters at all times.
Lightning will be constantly crackling around people's heads, between people's, to indicate like a passionate gaze.
Yes.
Every now and again you'll have a full-page spread, which is, I suppose, meant to represent inner turmoil, but the character will often be floating naked in the middle of the page.
Yes. Yes, so you have metaphorical representations of states of mind.
Yeah.
Panel borders cannot contain characters, especially main characters, who will cover like the entire... They'll break out of the panel borders, they'll be covering an entire page.
It's the most melodramatic art style imaginable.
Yes. Huge, of course, especially because it's Marie Antoinette. There's these gigantic dresses, very elaborately, a lot of detail drawn in the dresses, and often not, the characters. Another thing that'll happen is you'll get these Looney Tunes type gags in there, like a person's running away and their legs will turn into like wheels, or somebody's shocked and you'll see a big mallet hit them on the head.
Yeah, it still has stuff like that.
A person gets angry and they've got like huge fangs out of their face. Yeah.
Yes. So, or people will be kind of dumpy and comical. So like the Cardinal Duran, who is kind of one of the characters in the Necklace Affair, he's never drawn in the kind of exaggerated serious style that the main characters are drawn in. Instead he looks like a Tezuka kind of character.
Yes.
He's dumpy, he has a kind of like a round head, like a beach ball for a head. He's always trotting everywhere.
Yeah.
Yes.
And sometimes people have like a jagged, very rarely have a very jagged kind of border, very thick line border around like a silhouette of a character or something like that, all just to represent emotional states. Or it's so amazing too that a lot of the pages seem to start in the middle. Like you turn the page and you're looking at the middle because the person is taking up the whole page, even though there's panels behind them. You start in the middle.
Your eye is immediately drawn to whatever's dominating the middle of the page, be it an enormous portrait, or a ghost. Like there'll be figures out of, like, sometimes there'll be Greek myths.
Yeah.
So like Oscar or Andre will be Hercules or Ares. Right. not Hercules, but like Ares or Mercury.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what? What is happening? But they've just suddenly become idealized to represent kind of like the idealized vision that someone has of them, or the state of mind that they're in.
Yeah.
It's really something.
Yeah.
It's perfect. As you say, this is like crack for teenage girls especially.
Yeah, so that's why you kind of think that it was like I was under the maybe false impression at first that she was like, oh, she's trying to sell Marie Antoinette's lifestyle as desirable to these girls. Like the girls would love to have those dresses, or love to have that jewelry, or to be surrounded by these flowers and sparkles all the time. And really in those early chapters, the conflict with Madame du Barry is really, it seems like a schoolyard kind of rivalry between two girls.
Yes.
And you can really see how the readers would relate to that.
Yes.
But then there is really a shift, historically, in story terms, everything dives away from it.
It really works because, I mean, the story, I suppose, of Rose of Versailles is the story of Oscar, Lady Oscar,
Yeah.
a girl raised as a boy, who works, she's the chief of the palace guards, the Queen's royal guards at the Palace of Versailles. And although Oscar is admirable in every way, beautiful, icily beautiful in an androgynous way.
Yeah.
Fierce, disciplined, loyal, intelligent,
Yeah.
yet closeted. And I think these early chapters where all we see is the glitter of Versailles, and as you say, later on, it takes a political turn, where we start to see the world outside of Versailles.
Yeah.
And at that time we realise that for all Oscar's virtues, Oscar has no idea what the world outside of the gilded cage of Versailles is like. And the story of the Rose of Versailles is the story of Oscar's kind of like discovery of the world outside and her eventual embrace of the French Revolution, basically.
Yeah.
Because she ends up storming the Bastille. She leads in the world of Rose of Versailles. It's Oscar that leads the assault on the Bastille.
Right. Well, Oscar's for me, the key, like the linchpin of the series, because she is the fictional character.
Right. The others are actually real people.
They're historical people. Maybe a lot of the facts around are made up or whatever.
Yes.
But
it's pretty consistent. I mean, it's not history.
Right.
But it doesn't take too many it's pretty consistent.
Yeah, okay.
I hate to say that about historical fiction. I can't stand historical fiction. But it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's accurate enough. In fact, I don't think the manga ever says that Fersen and Marie Antoinette have a physical relationship.
That's right, it doesn't.
Which, of course, is essentially true to actual history because we don't know whether or not they had a physical relationship. But the consensus is that they didn't. A couple of years ago, some researchers reckoned they deciphered some letters.
Okay.
That and they felt that it indicated that their relationship was a little more passionate than people had previously assumed. But I couldn't find much about that research, and I don't really think much of it.
Okay.
I'm quite happy to shelve it under "we'll never know."
Well, right. Okay. So as you pointed out, Oscar's born the youngest of 6 daughters.
Yes.
To this guy who is the head of the French Royal Guard.
Yes.
And he's outraged. He's been wanting a son to take over as the head of the guard.
Yes.
So he's like, well, I'm going to raise this girl as a boy.
Yeah.
So
he just has a kind of like a mental break.
Yeah.
And from then on, he just pretends she's a boy at all times.
And I think we hardly ever see the dad really after that. He's almost not important.
Yep.
So Oscar basically dresses as a male.
Yep.
Has amazing Farrah Fawcett hair.
Yeah.
And has become like this amazing warrior because she's been raised to be a guard. Now, all of the ladies at court swoon over her.
Yes.
Because she's so...
Well, she's
beautiful.
She's androgynous. She's a very beautiful man as well as a very beautiful woman. She exists in a state in
between. And
between.
some male characters like Fersen come in and assume she's a man.
Yes. Oh, everyone assumes she's a man until they're disabused, essentially.
Yes.
Unless they already know.
But unless they're like the ladies already know.
Yeah, everybody knows that Oscar is a woman.
Yeah.
But when someone...
If they meet her for the first time,
they
they're
always
like,
think
this
she's
is
a man.
dude. This is a man. Yes.
So I couldn't find a source for this, but I assume that Ikeda was aware of... There's a character from French history from around this time.
Okay.
The Chevalier d'Eon.
Okay.
And this is a man who famously dressed as a woman.
Okay.
And who was a sort of kind of like half-rate spy and kind of ended up living in England. Mm. And it essentially just sort of insisted they were a woman from midlife sort of onwards. And would fight duels dressed as a woman. Okay. This is a very famous kind of, sort of a very interesting character. And now it probably would, in modern parlance, be considered transsexual, probably.
Right.
If you read their Wikipedia article about Chevalier d'Eon, it's been completely rewritten by people who are, I suppose, trans activists.
Right.
So I think there's a definite kind of historicity here. I imagine that.
Well, there's also there's an oddball caption in there. I think it's when Countess de Polignac moves in, and there's a caption which says sometimes the queens could bring in women to live with her in the palace. and sometimes they would dress as men. This is just mentioned in a caption.
Yeah.
And it says that, like, these weren't romantic relationships, but they would live as friends with the queen, and sometimes they would dress as men. And it's like, well, we don't ever see anybody do that, but we're told that it happens sometimes. I will say she's pretty, Oscar's kind of fluid in that sense, I guess, that I think she identifies as female, and later on she starts a relationship. She has a relationship with Andre,
yes,
right, later in the series.
And she doesn't ever, I don't think she experiences attraction towards other women.
Yes, no,
but
right.
Other women are constantly experiencing attraction towards her.
Yes.
Not just kind of the crushes of the ladies in waiting or the court ladies at Versailles, but serious kind of...
Yeah.
Like Jean that we already mentioned.
Oh, Rosalie is the one who really seems to fall in love with her. Jean's sister.
Yes. Yeah, well, she ends up committing suicide, doesn't she?
No, it's Charlotte. That was
Charlotte,
Polignac's daughter, yeah. No, Rosalie is
I've
Jean's
mixed
sister.
up Jean and Rosalie.
Yeah.
Because Jean was a real person and Rosalie was a fake one.
Yes, right, okay.
Sorry, you're going to have to go reconsider what I said earlier in that context. Because Jean de la Motte was a real...
Right.
But she was the swindler behind the affair of the necklace.
Well, that's what I was saying, that she disappears anyway, much
of course
like Madame du Barry.
She ended up moving to England.
Okay.
And writing her memoirs.
Oh, okay.
Which features in the manga, actually.
Okay.
Except in the manga, she doesn't go to England, she stays in France.
Okay.
Which is an exaggeration. This is not accurate. This is an example of where the manga is not being accurate. In the... There's going to be... Sorry, I just keep these little digressions. In the manga, she just disappears somewhere in France and then starts publishing her memoirs.
Okay.
In like 10 volumes, and they're all just accusing the queen of these most outlandish things, like that she was a lesbian lover and all this stuff. In real life, she went to England and published 1 volume of memoirs where she essentially just sort of defended herself.
Okay.
She repeated the things that she'd said at her trial. I was a victim. It was the queen is the villain. The queen bought the necklace.
Mm-hmm.
I never had anything to do with it. I'm innocent. Also, the queen has 100 lovers and is a complete reprobate. And people in France would have been able to read this because there's a very lively kind of underground press in France. That a lot of books are kind of produced cheaply in like Geneva, in Switzerland, and kind of smuggled in and sold, and everybody would have been reading this.
Okay.
It would have been really out there.
Right.
And wouldn't have done Marie Antoinette's reputation any favours in France, and which was already in kind of like rock bottom. Well, almost rock bottom by this stage. Yeah. Sorry, Rosalie has a big crush on Oscar.
Yes. 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 So the other 2 characters we get at the start, as you mentioned, are Fersen, who doesn't play such an important role right away, but we get Marie Antoinette, born Maria Antonia in Austria. Her mother is kind of the queen is
Maria
politically...
Theresa, the Grand Duchess of Austria.
Yeah, very politically savvy.
Yeah.
Decides to marry Maria, who's 11 at that age, engage her to
the Dauphin. Who's the future Louis XVI. So
we're starting with an 11-year-old Marie Antoinette. She's, all she cares about is playing, skipping studies, all that stuff is fine. She's 11. Then eventually the marriage happens. She goes over to France, and there's a whole thing about how, because she's the highest ranked in court, essentially, other people can't address her. She has to address them first.
Yeah, there's like a million rules about in the court.
We should have said this right off the top, but I hate the monarchy really intensely in any form.
Yes.
And it's stuff like this that normally if I was watching a movie, speaking of later, but any kind of like costume drama or anything like that. What's that? The Crown? All that kind of stuff. I just can't stand a second of it. It just drives me completely nuts. And I was surprised how much I was not hating it in this, and I'm trying to figure out why. And I think maybe it's because she was just like a little kid, and she was thrown into it, and she didn't really understand it either. And the important thing here that happens is the king's mistress, Madame du Barry, who was a former prostitute, now seems to be lording it over the court because of her control over the king.
Yeah, Louis XV.
Yes, and Mary has been taught by her mother that, like, prostitutes are the lowest of the low.
Yes.
And you can't ever... So she doesn't speak to this woman who kind of holds the highest position in court. She refuses to speak. So this causes tension. But I was like, well, she's just doing what she's been taught by her mother. It's not like her own agency, in a sense. Like, she's outraged, but that's just like kids who believe in Santa Claus or any religion or anything like that. It's just her programming.
Yeah.
So I was very sympathetic at this stage of the reading. And yeah, she starts having feelings for Oscar, as he said, like right at the beginning. It seems like there's going to be some kind of romance there, because as soon as Oscar walks into the room, we get the sparkles and the flowers and all
halo
that.
with flowers falling every
By the way, Reed texted me today, and you said that you had read like the whole thing. One of the reasons I was so shocked was because it's so full on. Like the artwork, it's not just the artwork, the story, every moment of it is so melodramatic and so full on. I'm like, spoiler, I do love Rose of Versailles, but I find it hard to read like a lot at once. You gotta have some kind of special glasses to block out the glare or something, I think, to read it for that long. But anyway, yeah, so Oscar comes in, there's a bit of a romance there. Meanwhile, we do get the story about Jean and Rosalie.
Yes.
So we get a kind of way here, which is, I guess, a bit like a Victor Hugo kind of vibe going on, where you get to see the poor side of town.
Yes.
And you think it's just the poor side, because I had no background on the historical figures or whether Jean was a real person or what. But we learned that Jean, so that we get this family with this mother and 2 daughters, Jean and Rosalie, and we learned that Jean was actually, she's noble born, because the mother was a maid in the home of these, what was her name? The
House of Vaudoise.
Yes.
The former ruling family of France.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so she was like, but Jean is the opposite of Mary. So Mary is very naive, flighty, shallow. Jean is shallow, but she's scheming.
Yeah.
And she's not going to live poor. She's like, I'm getting out of here. And she knows she's noble born. Her mother was a maid who's impregnated by the head of the house.
Yep.
And she runs out to like a woman on the street that's driving by in this carriage. And she's like, I'm this poor girl, but I'm from the house of, what was it?
Valois.
Valois. And this woman's like, what? Okay, you come with me and I'll raise you right. She just leaves home. Jean's like, I'm out of here.
Yeah, she just abandons her mother and sister.
Never looks back.
What's more, when they try and seek her out, she like has them thrown out.
Oh my god. Rosalie goes over there. And I don't remember why she went over there, or how she knew where she was, but she goes in and she's trying to...
She wants money, I think.
And Jean's like, oh, okay, yeah, just wait here a minute. Then she sends her boyfriend in, who literally whips her and actually gives him license to kill her, if necessary, and drive her out. It is a wild scene.
Yeah, so this is the con woman from the Affair of the Necklace as a child, essentially.
Yes, and her made-up sister.
Yes.
Which is, I think, a key
who is another
component of it.
another, also a scion of a noble house.
Yes, that comes up later, that she also, but from a different one.
So true.
Because she's being raised like, she's not the actual daughter of her mother. When her mother is hit by a carriage by Countess de Polignac and killed, she's like, I'm going to get revenge, and then she goes to...
Versailles.
She goes to Versailles. She actually tries to prostitute herself to Oscar.
And Oscar's like,
look, come live with me, and I'll get you some nice dresses, and we'll get you all set up. And then he takes her to court. She sees her own sister there at one stage. Yep. But then Polignac also somehow figures out that she's her daughter. Like, Polignac had a daughter and then given her up.
So,
her name hasn't changed, right?
The mother tells her the first name, and they go through all the pedigrees, and they find out that only one noble woman in all of France has these 2 first names. Yeah. It's de Polignac, and it's this... Because, of course, it's who killed her adopted mother. It's just the most dramatic.
Meanwhile, it's like, Polignac's other daughter, Charlotte, has been engaged at age 11 to this duke who we're told likes him young. And she kills herself.
Yeah, because she's in love with Oscar.
Yes.
Just like all the female characters. This is how we got started on this.
But actually, all this stuff was... To me, this was kind of the good stuff, in a sense, because... All the other stuff is just historical stuff that we're getting. Sometimes it comes to us in captions as information.
It's pretty light.
And this is just like soap opera. Like, it's crazy that both these daughters are from noble house, and they happen to see each other at Versailles, and they happen to be run over by... I mean, there's one point where, actually, when it's suggested at one stage that maybe Rosalie's mother threw herself in front of Polignac's carriage knowing that it was her inside. Like, she saw that it was her. I was like, oh, okay, you don't usually get that kind of explanation for Dickensian coincidences in these kinds of stories. So that was actually kind of good little twist in there, or a good little detail. But yeah, I was kind of digging all this craziness going on. And the Oscar stuff, because his mother becomes... embroiled in this war between Du Barry and Mary, because they both try to hire her as a personal servant, and then there's like a
Is that
scheme.
Oscar's mother? Or Andre's mother, maybe?
It was Oscar's mother.
Yeah, how come Oscar's mother was a... Yeah, maybe... Was it Oscar's mother?
It was definitely Oscar's mother.
Right. This part...
But then there's like this scheme to frame her for trying to poison... Was it Du Barry? Yeah, I think it was Du Barry. So there's also... But then this was a real person. Like, so Oscar was a real person. His mother's not real. This is all drama, soap opera drama that's been injected into this thing.
This is like a romance novel, basically.
Yeah.
This part is a bit tedious to me, frankly. I don't... I get that. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Well, what I'm saying is, you take that out, and what's left?
Well, it's just the setting.
Yeah.
Now, ostensibly, this book is about... Everyone says it's based on the French Revolution, but it's not really based on the French Revolution. It's not set in revolutionary France. It's set in the Ancien Regime.
Yes.
In pre-revolutionary France. Pre-revolutionary Versailles, to be exact.
Yeah.
And the story, essentially, as I said already, is Oscar and us, the reader, realising that there's more to the world of pre-revolutionary France than the gilded corridors of the palace at Versailles.
Yeah.
People are, like, starving, like, the soldiers have to sell their swords to feed their families. It's just, like, a big mess. And Oscar, like, literally had no idea. Like,
yeah, and this is...
Because we're revealed that Oscar's vaunted kind of, like, status and even abilities turn out to be less vaunted and less able than we originally led to believe.
Right.
In fact, it's revealed that Oscar's father, she inherited his role as head of the Royal Guards, but it's revealed that the Royal Guards are just kind of for display.
Right.
Everyone in the Royal Guards is very good looking.
Right. Right.
They're hired for their looks.
Ah, okay.
Oh, and their noble status too. They tend to be of high status as well. And in fact, in later volumes, when people meet Oscar and she says, "Oh, I'm the captain of the Royal Guard," they go, "Of course, because you're so beautiful." Right.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. No, that's.
And she sort of eventually as she kind of first of all, her father tries to force her to marry somebody.
Right.
For nebulous reasons. I think maybe he's worried about the changes that are going to occur. I don't really know, but
that actually. So I didn't read that far in the comic, but in the movie it happens, and it did make sense to me because...
Everything's sped up in the movie.
Well, it did make sense to me because he was so keen on her being a male.
Yeah.
I was like, well, why are you marrying her off?
Yeah, it's odd in the comic too.
Yeah.
He's sort of just completely done an about face.
Yeah.
Anyway, and she's absolutely not about it because she's a soldier. She knows what she wants. Yeah, duty first.
But she
ends up resigning from the Royal Guards and going to the French Guards, who are a kind of like a more ordinary military outfit, I think, in Paris, and it's completely different. Like, they don't respect her at all. Mm-hmm. They won't take orders from a woman. It's fine. In the palace, it was okay because she's kind of just like an ornament.
Right. Okay.
You can be weird in the palace.
Yeah.
The exception proves the rule. Of course, we have a woman captain of the guard in the palace.
Yeah.
Because this is the palace. But like Oscar had no idea.
Yeah.
This was all deadly serious for Oscar. And she couldn't conceive of people ever going without food. One time she gets in a bar fight and wakes up in Rosalie's house. And Rosalie serves her some soup. And Oscar's just like, well, can I have a coffee first? And they're just like, what?
Yeah.
And then she eats the soup and she's like, ugh.
Yeah, well, you kind of talked earlier about what an idealized character Oscar is, in some ways. And I think the way that she learns about the poverty beyond Versailles is part of that too. It is
idealized. Yeah.
It's idealized because what happens is this Duke is riding along and he gets a coin stolen from this little kid, Pierre, who that character has been seated earlier as a friend of Rosalie's or something. He lives in the neighborhood.
Yes.
He shoots his kid in the back.
Yeah.
It's crazy town. Yeah. He shoots his kid in the back. Oscar is like, I'm going to get that guy, and then sees him at Versailles. It's like, it's that Duke, and Marie separates him and says, look, Oscar, you're confined to house arrest for like a month. Oscar goes home. He's like, well, I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to go to our family lands, and I'm going to see what's going on out there. And he goes out and he sees how poor people are living, and then he comes back. So it's really...
And he's in a pub at one point.
Yes.
And he meets Robespierre
again. Yes, yeah.
This is the second time Robespierre is mentioned in the comic, which is always great. I'm always happy to see Robespierre pop up. Robespierre is
at the coronation. He had given
this is true.
Yeah.
Robespierre was studying as a very young man, like a teenager, we would say, was studying at a French school in Paris to which he'd received a scholarship, and he was a very bright student. And after Louis XVI coronation, when they were riding back to Versailles from Paris, Robespierre was chosen from the school to read a Latin address to them as they passed by. They were supposed to get out and listen to the address, but apparently they stayed in the carriage.
Okay.
This is in real life. In the comic, of course, they go out and meet him, and of course, and then he keeps popping up over and over. He's in it right up to the end. And Saint-Just, who's another kind of like Robespierre's protege, appears as well, who's also extremely androgynous.
Right. Okay. Yep.
And I bring this up because Robespierre is a very kind of like complicated figure with a very complicated historical legacy. But one thing that's usually not complicated about Robespierre is that in popular fiction, he's almost always presented as a villain.
Right, okay.
Usually.
Interesting.
Yeah. You know, Scarlet Pimpernel.
Yeah.
Doctor Who. Neil Gaiman's Sandman. He's usually pretty much an unambiguous villain.
Okay.
In these. So, and yet in this comic, he's not. In fact, he's presented very positively.
He's the voice of the people.
Very positive in this comic.
Yeah, right.
Which I think is again a kind of like an indication of Ikeda's background.
Yeah, where her loyalties lie. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's interesting things with Oscar before her eyes are opened. Like when the old king dies, we get a panel at the funeral. Not many people. I think there's like 40 people taking the carriage to be buried. There's this really tearful scene. You get to see Oscar's in complete tears, so sad about the king having died. And then when Mary finally speaks to Madame du Barry to prevent a war from breaking out between Austria and France, she finally breaks down and speaks to her. She's an absolute wreck afterwards. Like she feels like she's been beaten by a prostitute. And Oscar is like admiring her proud heart. Like he admires that about her, even though she's like 13 or 14 at this stage in the story. So we get the Rosalie, all that story is kind of going on. Oh, by the way, the scene where the old king dies of smallpox was pretty shocking, extreme. Really gruesome.
The skin sort of melts off his face.
Yeah.
It's pretty full on.
It was more like a shoujo horror comic at that stage. I was really pretty surprised by that. And then there's like hope for the new regime, but then it quickly, because we keep getting the scenes of the poor people. We hear from Robespierre himself, as you mentioned, that I thought things were going to be good and they're not going well under the
He says, I wish I never gave that address.
Yes.
Because he, like many people, had been hopeful that the accession of the new king would lead to social change, but it didn't.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Mary's mother back in Austria is like, oh, I wish that king had died later. Like, she's too young for this. Like, she knows the author is giving us some foreshadowing there through the mother's voice. I do wonder also, considering the target audience, if there's a bit of an assumption that the kids reading it wouldn't know anything about the revolution, and there was a bit
it's quite possible.
Education going on here. Like, I don't think there's an assumption that the reader would know who all these people are or what's going to happen. I think the foreshadowing here is genuine, like...
Yeah, would 1960s and 70s Japanese kind of like primary and secondary school education have covered the French Revolution? Probably not.
Yeah, don't know. Yeah, probably
almost certainly not, right?
Yeah.
And this is... And I mean, this is the book that kicked off...
In this kind of detail, definitely not. Like, they wear the necklace and all that kind of stuff, definitely not. Yeah.
Like... But this is the book that like Japanese people famously love France, right?
Yes,
it's because of this book.
That's right.
This book is why.
Yeah.
And in fact, in 2009, Riyoko Ikeda was given the National Order of the Legion of Honor, which is the highest award that the French nation can give to any foreigner.
Yeah.
She was presented it, and in Tokyo by the French ambassador, who told her she also not just the highest award, but the highest rank, the rank of Chevalier Knight, in this award was presented to Ikeda, and he said it is thanks to Ikeda that Japanese people have a cultural awareness of France's history, language, and cuisine.
Wow, amazing. Yeah. But I believe it. I mean, it's also why, Japanese people know Prince Edward Island because of Anne of Green Gables. And if you go to Gables and all the signs are in English and Japanese because they get so many Japanese tourists there because of that book.
Well, isn't there like a famous phenomenon? This is probably like a bit of an urban legend, but there's a story that Japanese people are always arriving in Paris and are experiencing culture shock because it's not like the Rose of Versailles.
Yeah, it's hard to know if that's... There used to be that urban legend, too, about Fargo, that this Japanese girl went to try to find the treasure that was buried in the snow because it said, based on a true story, in the story of Fargo. But it was actually false. It all turned out to be false. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, there was a story that the Japanese embassy in Paris employed sort of like a full-time person to deal with confused Japanese tourists that didn't understand why Paris didn't look like Amelie in Paris or Emily in Paris or whatever it is.
Yeah. Where were we?
Sorry, we're talking so much about the comic because, frankly, the film is like really not worth talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know. So once she becomes queen, Fersen has to leave the country. It's like she has feelings for him. He has feelings for her, but it's like he's got to go. He leaves. He goes back.
It's causing a big scandal, and this happened in real life.
Well, actually, there's 2 phases because he goes away for 4 years
to the American Revolution. Yeah.
No, this is after. The first time he just goes off and goes back to Sweden and gets educated, comes back. Then we get the scandal. Then he goes to the revolution. So in the comic, we get 2 phases of Fersen being around, which is conflated into one in the movie.
Yeah.
And I think... Oh, yeah, and then we get the whole Countess de Polignac stuff where, again, we see how naive and gullible Marie Antoinette is here. She's not really villainous. She's just like, oh, Polignac is really clearly manipulating her the way the comic presents it. Like, oh, I'm so poor, I need money. And Mary's, I don't know how old at this stage, 16 or something. Is like, yeah, I'll give you money. Come live with me at the castle, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then Fersen returns, and then we get all these assassination attempts on... Was it on Oscar with the chandelier dropping and the attack by highwaymen?
Allegedly masterminded by the Comtesse.
Yes, and she's about to be kicked out. Yeah.
This is all a bit silly.
It is silly. Yes, I agree, but that's the stuff that if you take it out, you're just left with some kind of historical textbook kind of thing. I think this soap opera stuff is... Sure, of course, but I'm saying, I don't mind that you're selling the soap opera...
It does, and yeah, I mean, this is the first... it does, yeah, and there's a lot more to come, really. Later on, there's the Black Knight arc, where there's this thief...
Okay.
Who is robbing all the noble houses, and Oscar is sort of robbing kind of like the noble properties in the city around Versailles. Mm. And Oscar appoints herself, because of her fierce sense of duty, appoints herself as to capture this Black Knight. And so he's stealing kind of like jewelry and guns. Everywhere he goes, he steals jewelry and guns.
Okay.
And it turns out that he's a revolutionary, of course.
Okay.
He's kind of like stockpiling. He's trying to get munitions and sell the gems to buy pamphlets or whatever. And it's because in the manga, this is why Oscar dresses for the only time we see Oscar in a dress. Oscar puts on a dress to stake out the Black Knight and then ends up dancing with Fersen, who doesn't recognize her. Even though they're friends. Yeah. He doesn't recognize that she's Oscar.
Yeah.
She's just a mysterious
It doesn't make any sense. They do it in the movie too, because if Fersen thought Oscar was a man, and then Oscar showed up as a woman and said, "Oh, I'm Oscar's cousin," okay, that's one thing. But at this stage in the comic, he knows that Fersen knows that Oscar is a woman. So why does Oscar have to pretend to be someone else other... It's so weird. It doesn't make any sense.
Oscar's dressed up as a woman to... Well, Oscar is a woman.
Yeah.
Oscar is wearing a dress.
Yeah.
Because she wants to catch the Black Knight.
Yeah. Right.
And then drama happens.
Okay.
Which is this encounter with Fersen.
Right.
Yeah, fine. And there's... Yeah.
Okay.
And that's how Andre gets blinded in one eye, because also part of the plan is for Andre to dress up as the Black Knight as well.
Okay.
To trick his companions.
This seems to be all kind of emerging from that plot to trick Cardinal de Rohan by dressing up a prostitute as Marie. Was that factual, or is that made up?
Yes, it was. That was true.
So maybe that's kind of been exploded into all these other disguised plot lines.
Yeah. All right. So we talked a lot about the necklace affair. I think we should probably explain what that actually was. So this is one of those stories. This is one of the things you learn about when you're studying the French Revolution. It usually comes up. It's not really... Doesn't really cause... It's a bit like when you study the Russian Revolution, you learn about Rasputin. Rasputin didn't cause the Russian Revolution.
Right.
The affair of the necklace didn't cause the French Revolution. But they're interesting stories because they're kind of a cross-section of kind of the forces at play.
Yes.
There was...
And maybe public sentiment.
Yeah, very much so. There was a... a hugely expensive necklace commissioned by Louis XV, who was Louis XVI's predecessor, his grandfather actually. And it was commissioned for Madame du Barry.
Yeah.
And it cost like a stupendous amount of money. So expensive that only one person in the world could possibly afford it. And that was the French king. Right. Like the jeweler had tried to sell it.
After he died, yeah.
Yeah, after Louis XV died.
So Louis XV dies and du Barry's kicked out. Like, this prostitute, you're out. Get out of here. Go away. So now the jeweler is stuck with this...
This necklace that he cannot sell to anybody.
Yeah.
I suppose he could break it up, but apparently he just couldn't bring himself to do it, apparently.
Okay.
Because it's a masterpiece.
Okay.
And he keeps trying to get the French crown to buy it.
Okay.
But Marie Antoinette won't buy it. Partly because she hates everything to do with du Barry. That rivalry was very real. And also partly, I think by this stage, she's sort of becoming aware that her profligate spending is having a negative public relations impact. Like, Marie Antoinette is very unpopular with the French people. Sort of almost from the start, but it only gets worse and worse and worse, especially when it's revealed how much money she's spending, because one of the French kind of like finance minister, a guy called Necker, he publishes the kingdom's finances in 1781. Not in their entirety, but one of the things that's revealed in the publication is how much money Marie Antoinette spends.
Yes, and she's been gambling at
that
Polignac.
too, yeah.
In the comic, Polignac is pushing her to gamble, and she loses. She just loses all the time.
Yeah. Anyway, but nonetheless, she won't buy it, despite this well-deserved kind of reputation for financial irresponsibility. She won't buy the necklace. Then Jeanne de la Motte knows about the necklace, and she cooks up a scheme. She contacts Cardinal de Rohan.
By the way, before this, so she's been through several schemes, and in the comic, one of them is her adoptive aunt, the woman that found her on the street. She murders her. She burns down her house.
Yeah, terrible.
Yeah.
Like, that's an unforgivable crime. I don't think anything like that happened in real life. I think that's made up for the comic.
Yeah.
But in this, she's...
So get to the necklace.
So she knows about the necklace. She's a lover, presumably, of Cardinal de Rohan, and she claims to be an intimate of Marie Antoinette. At the moment, Cardinal de Rohan is out of favour with the court. He's not allowed
Great scene in the comic where she says, "Oh, I'll introduce you to the Queen," and she's never been to Versailles.
Yeah. She's never even been to Versailles.
Her ambition is to go there, but she's like, "Well, I'll have to get."
Well, she's a
her
con
thing
artist.
is she cooks up the schemes after.
Yeah.
She tells the lie first, and then she's like, "Okay, I got to find a solution to this."
It's some good storytelling.
Yeah.
In real life, she's like a con artist. Anyway, she knows someone that can forge the Queen's handwriting in the Queen's signature, and she concocts a fake correspondence between Cardinal de Rohan and Marie Antoinette. De Rohan, who seems like maybe his biggest crime is that he's just a big pleasure-loving hypocrite. Like, he's a bishop in the Church of Rome, but in the Catholic Church, but he's like a
sex fiend.
He's like he's a philanderer, and his bishopric is in Strasbourg or something, but he doesn't want to live there. He just lives in Paris because he likes.
Right, and didn't Marie's father kick him out of Austria or something? There was something like that.
I think so. I think that's correct. Maybe, but he certainly he prefers Paris because he's like all French bishops. He's also a noble and a man of very high birth.
Okay.
And he's just accustomed to living on his rents. So he has all this money, like more money than he could possibly ever spend. And he is he is pursuing kind of like politics and stuff. He's not interested in actually doing his job. So he lives in Paris. He has all these affairs. This is all very typical for a kind of like an official of the church in France at this period. One of his lovers is Jeanne de la Motte. She cooks up this plan to have this correspondence forged. De Rohan eventually thinks Marie Antoinette has fallen in love with him, such is the tone of the messages. And as you mentioned, Jeanne even finds a prostitute who looks like Marie Antoinette and has them have a secret rendezvous, kind of like in the gardens at Versailles at night, when he wouldn't recognise her. And this is all part of the scheme to get the necklace. Eventually she convinces de Rohan that the Queen wants to buy the necklace, but secretly because of her current reputation for, spending lots of money. And de Rohan is convinced. He agrees to pay the first instalment and be the guarantor on the future payments. Yeah. He's convinced to hand over the necklace to Jeanne de la Motte, who promptly vanishes, breaks up the necklace, begins fancying the stones all over the place. Yeah. Eventually, the jeweler contacts the king and queen and says, are you going to pay for the necklace? And
Yeah. Jean got her necklace.
and this is like a big shock.
Yeah.
Because they had no idea. She's like, what do you mean get the necklace? And it all goes really badly because the cardinal's summoned and the cardinal says, well, I was tricked. I'm actually innocent. I was tricked. But Marie Antoinette is like really angry. She hates the cardinal because of his loose lifestyle. And she's like, well, I want him arrested. And this is a really bad idea because everyone hates her.
Yeah.
Right? And when she has the cardinal arrested, it's really bad press. And then she insists on a trial in France, a trial by in Paris by how much detail is necessary here? Anyway, there's a trial and everyone barracks for de Rohan, and sure enough, because he's innocent, the facts come out and he's found innocent. They capture Jeanne de la Motte. She's found guilty. She's branded with V's from the French word for thief on both her shoulders and sent to prison, from where she later escapes dressed as a boy to England, where she publishes the memoirs, as I mentioned earlier. And everyone loves this because everyone was even though the aristocrats are also very unpopular, Marie Antoinette is even more unpopular. So everyone's barracking for de Rohan, and when he's found innocent, everyone celebrates because it's this big victory over the Queen. And in the story of kind of like the coming of the French Revolution, this is seen as one of the events that kind of...
Like a triggering event.
Yeah, it's not really. But it has these...
inflammatory event.
But it has these... It has these features which are typical of the lead up to the French Revolution. The desperate financial situation, the hostility towards not the office of the king, but the people that occupy the office. Louis XVI to a lesser extent, but Marie Antoinette to a big extent.
Sex scandal.
Yeah, a sex scandal. Yes. And sort of the kind of like the hostility the conflict between the aristocracy and the king. So like part of the reason why it was such a bad move for the king and queen to arrest de Rohan was because the aristocracy had been kind of resisting the encroachment of royal power over the last several decades. Since the kind of like the reign of Louis XIV, the royal institution of power had been expanding at the expense of the nobility. Also, the nobility was threatened by kind of the upsurge of the growing middle class, or what we would call what was called the bourgeoisie, so kind of like merchants, lawyers and things like that, who are becoming more wealthy and are purchasing noble offices and competing with the old nobility for appointments. And the nobility, kind of feeling threatened from those two sides, is fighting back, pushing back against both the bourgeoisie and royal power in what some scholars call the aristocratic revolution. Insisting on kind of like their noble prerogatives, like their rights to certain offices, like very jealously insisting on their right not to be taxed, their right to certain offices, their rights to certain rents, and so on and so forth. And this is one of the big factors that kind of leads into the political crisis of the French Revolution. And so, in that sense, the affair of the necklace is an interesting cross-section of all of these stresses. As a cause of the French Revolution, like Rasputin, it didn't really cause the French Revolution. Anyway.
But I think that's kind of...
I would forgive you if you cut all of that.
I think that's kind of where Volume 1 of the Udon kind of ends around...
Anyway, we're an hour in, Kumar. We should probably talk about the film.
Yeah, so this was this Udon edition, which came out a few years ago, I think covers like 3 volumes of the original Japanese run. Okay. So now we get to this movie, which came out from Toho, not Toei, as I said last week. Okay. Came out in 1979. The opening credit says, based on the book Rose of Versailles by Riyoko Ikeda, so they didn't want to admit it was a comic book. Interesting. I guess. Oscar's mother... So it opens with Oscar's birth, and Oscar's mother dies in childbirth right away. So it's like, okay, so the indication is that the focus is going to be on Oscar, which it makes sense. Yes. I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Focus on... Because that's what Ikeda ended up doing anyway. That's right. Fine. I mean, the film's called Lady Oscar, yeah. But to kill the mother, who features in plot points... Fictional plot points seemed weird to me.
They just excise those plot points. Debarry isn't there. Louis XV isn't there.
No, that's right. Because it's after the birth. He says, "I'm going to raise her as a boy." We flash forward to a few years older.
Everything's in fast forward.
Fast forward, and then fast forward again. Because I was looking at the credits, and this girl named Patsy Kensit that played Oscar as a young girl. I was like, okay, she's gonna be on screen for a while. No, one scene. Yeah.
Probably less than 2 minutes.
Yeah, so we should mention, as we're going through credits, so after the birth we get the opening credits. Directed by someone named Jacques Demy, who I don't know. Written by Patricia Louisianna Knop, who wrote 9.5 Weeks.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And
I must have missed that. Jacques Demy, I also hadn't heard of him, but apparently he's quite a well-respected French auteur of the 1960s.
Okay.
Most famous for directing two musicals.
Okay.
Apparently quite well regarded.
Okay.
But by this point, his career very much on the wane.
Okay. So now we get the full-grown Oscar, played by Catriona MacColl, who's most famous for being in 3 Lucio Fulci movies, for his Gates of Hell trilogy.
Yeah.
If you go onto YouTube, there's dozens of interviews with MacColl, and they're all about Fulci.
Right. No one's interviewing her about this film.
No, but she speaks fluent French.
Does she? And yet in this film, they've got her speaking English.
Yeah, well, everybody speaks English. Sorry, we should have mentioned this is an English language picture.
So despite being a Franco-Japanese production,
Yes.
co-production, it's all in English.
Yes. Which is weird, but we got a French director, we got an actress who speaks fluent French, but only speaks
Ah, yes.
English in the movie. A lot of actors in this movie have a French accent, a lot have English accents.
Well, they
there's a
almost all
voiceover
have.
narration with a British accent for some reason.
Almost all the actors are British.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think...
I think she's British too, but she was working in France. She was living and working in France, I believe.
And Marie Antoinette, I think, she's putting on kind of the German accent. I think they're using... I hate to give the film even this much credit, but I think they're going with the conceit that when we hear a British accent, we're supposed to imagine that they're speaking French.
Yes, that's the way many of these movies work, right? Lots of them where they're speaking English, we're supposed to assume they're speaking French.
But, I mean, it's specifically an English accent, because we get Marie Antoinette, she speaks with a German accent.
Yes.
Because in real life, she would have spoken French with a German accent.
Yes. Yes. Now, here's what I want to say about Catriona MacColl, who, despite this movie's failings, I think if this is her first leading role, first movie, maybe not first movie, but like
probably
first
because
lead.
the Japanese, the company that stumped up the money, Shiseido, apparently a cosmetics company, which also claimed to be publishing the manga at the time.
No, Sanyusha was publishing the manga. I don't know. No, Shiseido is a cosmetics company. Now, this is going to be my next point, because Catriona MacColl wears blush, lipstick, and eyeshadow.
Yes, she does.
There is and yet, throughout the movie, it's a lot like Veronica, where people are saying lines that are not what's happening on screen. And people are saying, you're a man. This is not a...
She does not look anything like
This is a woman, she's got wearing makeup like a woman, and I don't know how to put this delicately, but she's a shapely woman, and they put her in clothes that...
Tight clothes
that, her figure is accentuated by these clothes. Let's put it that way.
Perfectly put. Now, this is a problem, I suppose, with the... It's easy for Oscar in the manga to look strikingly androgynous, because the art is very stylized.
Yes.
Men look a certain stylized way.
Yeah.
Women look a certain stylized way. And you can make Oscar look in the middle by just splitting the difference.
Yeah.
I got a quote here. Oscar's graphic image stands between those of typical male characters and female characters. She is taller than other females, but shorter than the males. Her eyebrows are thicker than the females, but thinner than the males. Mm-hmm. She looks more masculine than the female characters, but more feminine when contrasted to male ones. You can have an androgyny in a manga because they're just about 10, 12 lines.
Yeah.
In the film, it's really hard to do that unless you're casting Tilda Swinton or someone.
Yeah.
And there's only one Tilda Swinton. And in 1979, she was like 16 years old.
But I would say at least leave off the makeup.
Yes.
But I think what's happening here is Shiseido has sponsored this movie, and the cosmetics company is like, put her in the makeup. I don't think anything is her fault in this movie. I think her performance is actually... She reads her lines, she's fine. I think she's fine. I think there's a lot of problems with the direction she's been given and the makeup that's been put on her by the producers.
Yes. So, you are 100% correct. I couldn't find any proof of it, but I have no doubt that this is what happened.
Yeah.
But I know for a fact that Shiseido launched a new cosmetic line in conjunction with the film's release.
Yeah.
And Catriona MacColl was the face of this cosmetics line. Mm-hmm. So she's wearing those cosmetics. They've insisted that she wear them. And it doesn't make any sense because... So first of all, I don't think she could pull off androgynous anyway.
Yeah,
because she's so feminine.
Yeah.
But she super duper can't pull it off when she's got a face full of makeup.
Yes, it's crazy.
Now, Jacques Demy, the director, he wanted to cast someone called Dominique Sander as Oscar. I had to look her up. She's no Tilda Swinton, But she did appear in a film in 1970 called The Conformist, where she plays an androgynous character.
Okay.
And if you look at photos of her, again, she's... It'd be an exaggeration to say androgynous, but she does have quite a prominent chin. And if you see photos of her in The Conformist, I could see her playing Lady Oscar.
Because I'm trying to imagine, this is going to be way off topic, but it reminded me of, if you encountered this person that claimed to be male, and you met Catriona MacColl, it would be like Quark and Pell in DS9. You would be feeling these feelings that you've never felt before for another man, and you'd be like, why do I feel this way? I'm having trouble dealing with these new emotions I'm having around this man.
Or like Zap Brannigan and Leela in that episode, War is the H Word. No, but it's like you said, it's silly, and it takes you right out of the film.
Yeah.
Because they're saying, you're a man.
And also, Dad in this is a real hard ass, and he's in it a lot more than in the manga, at least in the first part. And he's like, this is going to be a man. And I'm like, well, why are you putting makeup on your daughter if you want him to be a man so bad? This is...
This time, like, the costumes are pretty good, but in this period, women didn't wear makeup like that anyway.
No, I also, yes. Yeah.
It's just wild.
Yeah.
Okay, so... As I said, the director had a certain actor in mind, but Shiseido said no, they wanted an unknown.
Okay.
Specifically so that unknown could help launch the cosmetic line that they launched in conjunction with the film's release. And that was Catriona MacColl.
Okay. So then we cut to, as she's growing up, we hear about the engagement that's happened between Marie and the Dauphin. It's not shown, it's off screen. It's all off screen stuff. And then then suddenly she's promoted, Oscar's promoted to the Royal Guard. Next scene we see her, is Antoinette picking out dresses, which is quite a bit later in the comic. I mean, she's overspending at this stage. She's very corrupt. We don't have any of the innocence, the gullibility, none of that stuff. It's all, there's like one line where
it lacks everything you liked about the way she's portrayed in those early volumes.
Yeah.
Which I think feeds into the Oscar's awakening, kind of political awakening, say.
Yeah.
Because Versailles is this bubble, and it's when the bubble pops, because of all of the external forces that are occurring, that Oscar comes down on like the correct side of history and leads the assault on the Bastille. And Marie Antoinette's kind of innocence is a part of that in those early volumes, I think, in setting up that world. All missing here. Here she's just sort of an unambiguous kind of villain.
Not only that, like, as I said, you think it's going to be about Oscar. We cut to...
Oscar's hardly in it. It's really annoying.
We cut to Versailles. She's picking out dresses that are super expensive. And Oscar's kind of standing in the corner. And the camera almost never goes over to get reaction shots of how Oscar feels about the dresses.
The film's called Lady Oscar. And as you say, Oscar's usually standing in the corner.
Yeah.
You're right. And it doesn't track over and show us her reactions. We don't get cuts to her face.
Yeah. Not only that, I mean, one of the reasons we started this podcast was the question of how do you translate these visuals into live action, especially. And it's weird. Like, all the interior shots are done at middle distance. There's never any extreme close-ups. You know what? We need some Shaw Brothers flash zooms on people's face. Like, we need some extreme camera work.
We need something like
some
in
weirdness.
last week.
Yeah.
Some of those snap zooms, like Donna's, like the car crash scene, Lois trapped in the car, it couldn't be less like the melodramatic visuals that are on every single page. I couldn't agree more. And in fact, I found I don't know anything about Jacques Demy, but he doesn't deserve his reputation if this is typical of his oeuvre. Because this is the most prosaic, boringly directed film.
Initially I thought the problem was the interiors, because when you get some exteriors of Versailles, I'm like, oh, this actually looks decent. But then when you get to the slums, those streets all look the same. No matter where they are, it's like, this is the same street, but you put the camera at the other end and you're trying to fool us or something like that.
The direction is fucking terrible.
It really needed Baz Luhrmann, is what this needed. It needed someone
like
really...
Sofia Coppola's like Marie Antoinette film.
Yeah, well, even that was... I think it needs something really extreme that's annoying, that's hard to watch for more more than 10 minutes in a row. Because this was so bland, as you said, prosaic. It's just like...
It's just so anodyne.
It just looked like very standard costume drama, except that the fact that there's a woman that's supposed to look like a man but doesn't is hanging around in the scenes.
And we just have, every 5-10 minutes we have just this unnecessary voiceover telling us things that if he'd been engaged in directing this... I just assume he just didn't give a fuck. And if he'd been engaged in directing the film, he could have given us that information that's being given in the voiceover through scenes, through dialogue, even through, like a shot of the city or something. But instead we're just getting, and then they were in Versailles. It's like, we know they were in Versailles.
Not only that, there's contradictions in the voiceover. So when that Duke... In the comic, he kills the little kid. In this one, he doesn't. He's just annoyed by something's blocking the road, and the Duke is annoyed. And then he decides he's going to have a duel with Oscar because Oscar calls this Duke out. Blah blah blah. But then the voiceover says that night, Oscar learned what the poor people really lived like. It's the middle of the day. Later on in the movie. I think there's it's a funeral for the baby, the Marie Antoinette's son that's died, and the carriage is going through the streets, and people are lined up on the streets, and then the voiceover tells us the bells tolled for 40 hours, but no one noticed them. I'm like, the people are lining the streets, they noticed. You literally giving us in the shot. It was bizarre. Yeah. Bizarre what's going on with this voiceover that often didn't match what was happening on screen.
That duel, incidentally.
So it's not in the comic. In the comic, as we mentioned, Marie Antoinette goes out of her way to stop the duel from happening, and that's when Oscar goes off and learns about poor people. Yeah. Which is, maybe ridiculous in itself, but here she actually has the duel, and it's a very slow motion.
It's not exciting
duel.
At all.
And in fact, the bar fight is similar. It actually reminded me of Prince Valiant, that really slow motion battle they had there.
Well,
and it's like
blast from the past.
She pulls the gun out very slowly, shoots this guy at 10 paces.
It's just shot in the most anodyne. It's just going through the motions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's
just in the middle distance.
Here's an exciting duel, so we got to shoot a duel. Okay, you stand there, there.
The screenwriter put in a duel, I guess, so that the film would have something exciting in it, because it makes sense in the context of an enormously long, 1,000-page long manga to kind of have this circumstance where the duel doesn't eventuate, and then we find out that actually dueling was banned in France at the time, and that even if you fought a duel, you would have to leave the country because you would be on trial for murder. No. Okay, fine. We got a movie where we have to cut all that right down. Yeah. Let's just throw in the duel because this is what people want to see when they watch a film set in...
does Oscar learn anything from it? Does she...
No.
Why? This guy didn't even kill a kid as he does in the comic. No. He was just annoyed and stepped out of the carriage and slapped Oscar, and then Oscar was like, well, let's have a duel. So there's no lesson learned for...
Nope.
There's no journey... of enlightenment for Oscar through
this. It's literally just in there because they felt that film should have a duel, and then I guess maybe Demy's on the right track here. He treated it with all the attention it deserved by shooting it in the middle distance, and there are no cuts. They just sort of stand there facing one another, and then she shoots, and then he just sort of
somehow he missed. Like, how explain this? They both fired. Doesn't make any sense.
That's how duels were fought. You would stand. Whoever was the better shot, generally.
Would you miss at that range?
They were really inaccurate, those pistols.
Okay, I did consider that possibility.
Then we also get a scene where the father is really happy that she's fighting a duel.
Yes. It's the exact opposite of the comic, where he's furious that she ran away. Oscar runs away for a month when she's supposed to be in her house arrest. Yeah. Comes back, Dad is furious with her, and says, you're not supposed to duel, and Marie saved you from a duel. Yeah. And in this, he's like, the glory of our family.
Yeah, it's a great duel. Here's my panther bone pistols. Yeah. I'm so proud of you. It's just... Yeah. None of it makes sense.
Okay, so we get Jean and Rosalie here as well, but Jean comes up to the carriage, as in the comic, and says that I'm the daughter, but this seems to be a lie, because we don't get any background previous to this showing that she is the daughter of the Valois family. She just comes up and makes it up, it seems.
It's just, and that's odd, because in real life, she really did claim to be a member of that family. So why omit it? Whatever.
And they've also left out the whole Rosalie...
Well, everything's in fast forward. It's for time.
And also, Rosalie is not the daughter of Countess de Polignac, which to me was an interesting thing to admit, because again, it's a fictional element. Why leave it out of the movie?
No time. Everything's... This film is just, why does it exist? Yeah. They just hacked out chunks of it
So Rosalie comes to see Jean at her house, as in the comic, but she doesn't get whipped or threatened with death. The aunt dies, but there's no fire. Like, all that super dramatic, hilarious, fun, weird stuff in the comic is not
missing.
there. The bar fight happens. The thing about the bar fight was the Foley guys, whoever was making the sound effects for these punches, they earned their money, because Oscar punches people in the stomach and there's a huge boom, boom, huge sounds. Oscar gets taken back to somebody's house to recuperate. There's a hilarious nude scene here, because Oscar decides to take off her top. Like, she gets up, she's lying in bed, she gets up, she takes off her top, gets back into bed. She's got her pants and boots on. Why?
You know why.
I know why, but what's the logic of, okay, you're not gonna leave your boots on? You took your top off to go to sleep?
There's no nipples on your feet.
So she can sleep. She can't sleep with her shirt on. Her boots are fine. I can sleep in my boots, but I can't sleep. There were some hilarious, unintentionally hilarious moments in this movie. That was one of them. So we get the Furson's been hanging around. They've been eyeballing each other since opening scenes. Him and Marie, and we get the scene where they're in a kind of gazebo, or not a gazebo, it's actually a large structure, some kind of outbuilding, and the camera, this is the only time the camera really tries to do anything exciting. It kind of revolves around them and says, the voiceover tells us what a romance they're having. In the comic, this is handled really through, like the voiceover tells us about all the rumors and gossip that's going on about them.
Yeah.
In the comic, we get to see scenes at court where people are gossiping about them. It's like, that's how you tell the story. Having this voiceover and have the camera circle around them it's not doing the job.
So
after that scene, we get some commentary. We get a court scene where some people are commenting on it a little bit, but it's like, it's too little too late or something. I don't know. Yeah, okay, so we get the Cardinal comes in. There's a moment here where Jean winks broadly at her boyfriend as she's scamming the Cardinal. I laughed at that too. I don't think I was supposed to laugh at it, but I was like, this is so broad and hilarious. Furson has to go off to
the war.
He has no English. In the comic, he is tortured. He is tortured by his love for... His unrequited love for Marie Antoinette.
Well, no, it's very much requited.
Well, it's requited, but
he feels guilty because it's bringing her into disrepute.
Yes, and he feels awful about it, and he's really tortured and anguished about it. In the movie, he's like this cool dude that's like, yeah, I'm into the Queen.
Yeah. But I gotta go fight in America, baby.
Pornographic drawing has been produced.
Also true.
And Oscar shows it to him, and he's like, yeah, big deal. And he's like, whatever. It's not, I don't know what he says. I can't remember, but he just doesn't care. He's like, I'm going to go fight.
The Queen featured prominently in pornographic pamphlets of the time.
Yeah. And one thing I did, so I actually like the scene where she's setting up her fake hovel. Marie Antoinette is setting up her fake little village here. I thought this worked pretty well. I think it's glossed over pretty quickly in the comic, if it's mentioned at all. I don't know if you've ever been to Versailles, but that's the funniest bit of the whole thing. When you go out on the grounds and you see the little hovel where she used to pretend to be a poor person.
Yes, that's pretty rough on her. I haven't been to Versailles. I would very much like to. But that was actually a common folly of the nobility of the time. It wasn't exclusive to her.
Okay. But it's a really good scene where she wants the turds to not stink. Like, she wants fake turds.
She doesn't want the shit to stink.
She doesn't want the shit to stink. And
brilliant.
She wants all the maids to be really pretty and all
the
this kind of
shepherds
stuff.
to have broad shoulders.
Yes.
She wants to churn butter. Like, churning butter is a really awful job, allegedly. I've never done it. But it's, like, the worst job. And she just can't wait to do it.
Yeah.
But she'll do it for, like, 2 minutes, and then she's had enough.
Finally, she gives birth to a daughter. The whole court is there watching, which I guess is a real thing, but it's not presented in the comic like that.
Yeah.
But I totally believed it. I thought that scene was kind of good as an addition as well.
They had no private life.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why when she kept going to that little, the fake village away from court, it was another thing that alienated the aristocracy from her, because ever since kind of like Louis XIV, the royal family did everything in front of the courtiers, the aristocracy.
Right.
The aristocracy were made to compete for the right to be in that space, observing the royal family at close proximity, being part of the toilette, helping them dress, all this stuff. Yeah, it was such an important part of court life, and that was another thing that annoyed everybody that she wasn't doing it.
Ah, okay. Okay. So now we get the affair of the necklace. DuBarry is mentioned in this scene. This is the only line of dialogue.
Yes.
She wasn't in the movie. They just mention her at this stage, oh, this was for DuBarry, and if you don't know what's going on, if I hadn't read the comic, I'd be like, who's this DuBarry person? What are they talking about?
Right.
It's just introduced very randomly. It's very confusing. We get a bit of the scam from Jean to try to steal it. She gets branded. You said all that stuff is
gruesome.
Yeah. And
All
then
this
Marie
doesn't-
Antoinette wants to be an actress.
Yeah, again, that's something that she would do. She had a little theatre built, and she liked to put on plays
Right.
with the courtiers, like
Okay.
make them all learn lines, make them put on little plays, just something that you did to pass the time in Versailles rather than government.
Sir, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say, all of this stuff, this lead up to the French Revolution stuff, it all just feels so pointless. It's like you were saying, right? Because we're not... The film's called Lady Oscar, but it's not... Instead, it seems to be kind of like a really shitty documentary about the origins of the French Revolution with an enormous amount of detail missing, and just a kind of surface level survey of some of the causes of the French Revolution, and Oscar kind of standing around in a tight pants.
Yeah. So the father arranges
just so
Oscar's marriage to this pervert. There's actually a funny line of dialogue in here where she says, I would rather lay with a dog or something.
And he's like, oh, I'm into that.
He says something like
He has
that.
all these creepy lines. In the comic, this guy is actually kind of a hero. Like, he's a nice guy in the comic.
Okay.
And he eventually calls off his suit because he cares so much for Oscar that he won't take her away from her chosen life of being a soldier.
Yeah.
In this, he's just like this creep.
Yeah. So...
He has all these creepy lines. She tries to fake him out by dancing with other women and then kissing one on the lips.
Yes, that's right.
And instead he's just into it.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, I'm sorry that you've paid for bad goods. And he's like, on the contrary, I like it very much.
Yeah. This guy, it's non-stop with this guy. At first, I almost wrote a note. This guy's a bit of a pervert, and then like within 30 seconds, I was like, "This guy is a pervert," is what I had to write in my notes because he was completely, especially when the dog comment happened.
And it just doesn't go anywhere.
No,
The
it's just
storyline
like she just like refuses. You know what?
It's there because it's in the comic, and this film is obviously for people that like the comic, and yet if you've read the comic, you're going to be infuriated by this because the character in the comic is completely different.
Right. Yeah.
He's not a perv. Instead, he's yet another touzle-haired, glamorous French.
And in fact, and again, this is all part of the fictional side of things because Oscar is a fictional character. So all this stuff is made up in the first place. So there's no reason to arbitrarily put this conflict in. I don't know. Anyway,
it's just baffling.
So the prince hilariously gives a deathbed speech about the people, the voice of the people. And Oscar's listened to it like not really sure. Now this is where it gets really crazy because there's not that much time left in the movie. But Andre has, at the very start of the movie, Dad had said that Oscar was going to be in the Royal Guard and Andre was going to work in the stables for whatever reason. It's a bit crazy. Now Andre has joined the revolutionary side. He's like on the side of the people. And he tries to convince Oscar. He said, you have to join us. And Oscar's like, no, I can't do it, and runs off. But like in the next scene, I think it's the next scene, Oscar is ordered to fire on the people and she's like, I can't do it. And then she's arrested and then it's like suddenly, okay, I'm part of the revolution now. And
then they bust her out. She goes home. She fights a duel with her father.
Sword,
in an absurd scene. Her father beats her. He's like some old fart.
Yeah.
He beats her. Then Andre runs in and saves Oscar from him. Then they leave and the father sits down to soup.
Yeah.
And he's eating soup. And he says, well, gonna eat my soup. Also, tomorrow morning I'm gonna have to tell the king that he needs to catch 2 traitors. And there's all this trite, like, as you pointed out, the Dauphin, like the prince, Andre, Oscar, the nanny, they're always delivering these trite, pat little phrases about democracy and liberty, and there's no depth to it, there's no pathos. It's just like, the man goes, well, I'm going to have to tell the king that he needs to catch 2 traitors. And then she goes, well, you're going to have to tell him to arrest the whole of Paris because they're all traitors.
It's ridiculous that this speech comes from the prince, this 5, 6-year-old, 10-year-old prince, who we've never seen before. I think was he in any scenes before? Suddenly he's on his deathbed and he delivers a speech and we're like, what? This is supposed to be something? And then he's dead.
He's in the comic, but he's much more like a child. He dies, all he wants to do is ride a horse.
Yeah.
This film, the comic is full of this. It's like you said, it's non-stop. You need to like deaden your emotions before you read it. Because this prince, he's like dying of spinal caries, and all he wants to do is ride a horse. He's like all these lines about how I hope when I'm born again, I'm a strong man and I can lead the kingdom. And Oscar's shedding tears over
that
him.
You can see how the skeleton of that was what they picked up on to make that scene in the movie, and it's a nonsense scene.
Yeah. Why is
he so wise?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. So basically the climax of the movie is Oscar and Andre sleeping together in the hay, literally in the hay, in a barn or something somewhere.
They do sleep together in the comic. It's a pretty impactful scene. I read that it was very shocking for the audience of the time, and also it also is very consistent with the way that Oscar's been presented. Like, you never see Oscar's breasts, unlike in the film, where you definitely do see Oscar's breasts. You don't see Oscar's breasts. And actually, Andre is smaller than Oscar, and he has feminine features of his own. In fact, his eyes are larger than all the other, like a lot of the other male characters in the manga's eyes. And it's a big moment, a big shocking moment in the comic. In the film, they just sort of lie on top of one another and the scene ends.
Yeah.
And then we cut straight to the Bastille being stormed.
Yes.
It's not a very good Bastille. It's just sort of a corner.
Yeah. And one street, and the Bastille. And Andre shot.
Yes.
In the back, I think, or no, I can't remember. But he falls.
Yeah, he's killed.
And then they storm the Bastille, and then Oscar goes looking for him, calling out, Andre, and then the camera kind of does that pan like aperture thing where it like closes on or something like that, or like basically it goes to.
Well, the film.
She doesn't find him.
Meanwhile, the film just ends.
Yeah.
Well, everyone's singing a revolutionary song. They're singing La Carmagnola, which is another ahistorical moment because that song didn't arrive until 3 years later, since like 1792. So, and everyone knows it's like aside from the Marseillaise, it's the other famous song from the French Revolution.
Right.
And so it's a celebratory moment, and yet Oscar's wandering through the street through all these singing people, calling out for Andre, and then the film just ends.
I kind of liked it as a move. I thought it was a little bit of a ballsy move to have her not find him at the end. It was almost a bittersweet. It was an attempt at a bittersweet moment, I think, is what they were going for.
I feel like it just peters out.
Yes,
especially in comparison in comparison to the ratcheted up to 11 emotional climax of the comic, which is that Andre dies before the assault on the Bastille. He dies, and it's very emotional. Then Oscar leads the assault on the Bastille, which is. So in the actual fall of the Bastille, there were defecting royal guards or French guards that participated in the assault, including a lieutenant from the royal guard who I think maybe inspired Oscar's role in the manga. Anyway, Oscar leads the assault, gives them kind of like the knowledge that they need to defeat the defensive garrison at the Bastille, and then she's shot. She's identified by the commander of the garrison as the main threat. It's like, if we get rid of her, they'll stop. So, and then there's crosshairs. There's no crosshairs in the 18th century. There's no one's using sniper glasses but nonetheless, it's a symbol we all recognise as a crosshairs. Oscar's shot like 3 times.
Wow.
Over 3 pages. Collapses. Angelic Andre appears before her and escorts her into the afterlife. Her last words are like, "Vive la France." And then both her and Andre go and escort Nanny into the afterlife as well. Wow. Again, as glowing angelic figures dressed in togas and sandals. And it's just, as you say, you almost want to shield your eyes. Yeah. And in comparison to that, I don't understand why this film just sort of like ends in such a fizzer. Like, it's such a bizarre ending.
Yeah.
Considering the source material. Yeah. It just kind of fizzles out. Ridiculous.
Yeah. I don't think fizzles might not be the right word, because I don't think it was ever bubbling. But you kind of pointed out something that the camera's never, except for that scene where it goes around Versa and Marie, it's never up in the corner or anywhere.
It's never doing anything exciting.
Never amplifies anything that's happening.
And it couldn't, as you pointed out, it couldn't be more different from, as a visual style, it's the exact opposite of the comic.
Yeah.
Which is constant melodrama. Ray beams, close-ups,
Yeah.
people transparent, overlaid over panels, auras, coronas of
Yes,
fire,
yes.
lightning bolts flashing between eyes, and here we've just got, this is like a home movie. No, except with a steady cam.
Yeah.
It's like a documentary or something.
Yeah.
Oh, man, it's just really odd.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of trivia for this film.
Okay.
There's not a lot of detail about it online. I don't have any idea what the budget is, but it was absolutely not a success.
No, apparently it didn't even get released properly in France, I
That
think.
blows my mind. It was never released in France, despite being a Franco-Japanese production with a famous French director, and this manga as well, like Leiji Matsumoto, is big in France.
Yes.
This is very big in France.
And I think it was called, the manga was called Lady Oscar in Europe.
Right.
In various, well, like probably Italy as well was another release.
So this wasn't released in... So presumably it was released in Japan, and that's it. Why film it in English then? It's so weird. Anyway, according to Wikipedia, box office take $220,000.
Okay. Wow. Painful.
As you know, Frederick Schott, famous translator of manga and author of the book Manga,
which is we've mentioned it a few times before. He also translated Astro Boy, that whole series.
That must have been when we mentioned it. He did the translation for this movie. So at the time when this movie was filmed, there was no English language translation, and there wasn't one for many years, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
He did it very quickly, apparently. I read an urban legend that he did it in such haste, he scribbled it in the margins of an actual copy of the manga. Eventually there was only a single copy of the translation, which he gave to the filmmakers, and it vanished.
They lost him, yeah.
Although apparently you can read some of it.
So I think there's one chapter in manga. In fact, for many years, so manga I think came out around early 80s. I can't remember the year of the first printing. Let's see if it says here. First edition, 1983. So for many years, we would have this one Leiji Matsumoto war story in here, which I think we mentioned when we did that. There's a bit of Tezuka in here. This is all very exotic stuff that was this is the only place we could read it.
Yeah.
And there's one chapter of this thing with these characters, these flowers exploding, and and all the dresses and even the balloon shapes are there's so much design element stuff on every page and every panel. But these kind of characters too, I wanted to mention as well, was my wife has these swap cards, these trading cards, these random cards from when she grew up in the 70s. With these shoujo characters, various shoujo characters, so it was somehow getting around the world in some form of distribution. Anyway, I did hear that story too, that he had produced a translation which was lost. And then I think Sanyusha put out a bilingual edition for schools or something.
Yeah, as a language learning tool.
Impossible to find those, but those were you couldn't even get those until Udon put out these very lovely deluxe editions a few years ago. It was just unobtainable.
Fantastic. As presumably become clear over the course of the podcast, this manga is a very big deal. It's been adapted many times, not just in this terrible movie. Yeah. There's an anime series.
Oh, lots of Takarazuka performances. So Takarazuka
you have to explain that.
It's a region of Japan, it's a city, which has a very exclusive, specific theater, which is an all-women review. So it's like your Broadway productions, but the actors are all women. So this is almost perfect for although Takarazuka goes back from back to 1920s, I think. Yeah. So I think probably was an influence on the manga as well, the androgyny and that kind of stuff was part of it. So
Right, so the first Rose of Versailles musical by the Takarazuka Review came out in 1974.
Yeah.
And it's been pretty much running continuously ever since.
Yeah. There's been multiple productions of it, yes, for sure. And then there's the anime series, etc., yeah.
The only other thing we could talk a bit about Oscar, because we do have a long-running segment on this podcast, which is Cishet Male Solve Sexism.
Yes, okay.
So originally, Ikeda apparently made Oscar a woman because she didn't feel confident writing that same character from a man's perspective.
Interesting, yeah.
Allegedly. But from then on, Oscar becomes kind of an important obviously the most important character in the book. Asuka's an interesting character because she has like a woman's sensibility, almost, but she's also very prickly. She has a prickly kind of sense of honor, which and kind of like a man's agency. But her arc, the story arc where she discovers the need for revolution almost, is not really dependent on the fact that she is in a man's role. Because she's surrounded by all these people who don't get it. Like men. She's surrounded by aristocratic men who don't get it. Yep. Going right up to Louis XVI. And there's a big body of work about Asuka as a feminist figure, which I didn't... There's no time to read it.
Yeah.
I did read one article. This article linked Asuka's kind of like apotheosis with the revolution itself. So Asuka's story is kind of like the story of the revolution, or the lead up to the revolution. Because when Asuka dies storming the Bastille, that's usually when people say that's when the old regime fell. And as established with, what happens to Marie Antoinette, with the way she's trapped in that role, and she ends up becoming a mother, she's innocent and is kind of like forced into all of these unfortunate choices. Kind of like the old regime, the old kind of like sexist old pre-revolutionary regime falls, and it's Asuka kind of that helps make that happen. It's a twofold triumph. The revolution's triumph is Asuka's triumph. They both vanquish the old order and make way for the new. And that's just something I read.
Yeah, interesting. All right, let's do our ratings. So I'm a big yay on the comic. I think comics is wild. I think it's amazing. It's important, historically important, although that's not relevant to the rating of it, but I've only read it in snippets in the past. I did have it in Japanese for a while because there was no English one, and I would just flip through it and just be amazed at the level of intensity that's maintained just page after page. Even that alone was amazing to me. But I'm keen to hear your take on it because I thought for sure, I'm still not going to guess if you're going to say yeah or nay, but I was like, boy, am I going to have to defend this book today? And then I got your text that said you'd read up to volume 7. I was like, what is going on with this guy?
Why would I read? Well, yeah. Well, I like to do all the reading you said. Okay. And I'm a stubborn person. I read the hell out of this comic. Look, for me, my vote is nay.
Okay.
Which you probably expected. Because, right, first of all, I don't like historical fiction.
Okay.
Just as a general rule. The inaccuracies irritate me.
Yeah.
You could be reading the actual history, which is just as interesting. Quite often the setting doesn't add to the story with these kinds of things. Like, why not just read a story set anytime? Yeah. Whatever. So that was a kind of like a vote against it already. It's so melodramatic. It's like, as you said, you used the word soap opera. It's really full on. It's just especially the early chapters, it's just chapter after chapter of kind of like schoolyard shoving, big strong men. There's a panel, there are lines, like, I think I took a picture of one panel, which if you'll excuse me, I'll just find it and read it. It's amazing, this panel. I wish you could see it. It's Rosalie. Her eyes are blank. She's surrounded by a corona of energy, a scintillating, coruscating corona of energy. There are two explosive word balloons around her, and the dialogue is, who is the lucky woman who will be cradled in your strong arms against your broad chest? What sort of woman is she? Imagine 300 pages of that. Yeah.
No, I get it, but my thing is that is what it is.
Sure. Having said that, I think, obviously, this comic is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it's such a seminal comic in the history of Japanese manga. It's what kicked off the famous Japanese francophilia. It really is very visually impressive. Apparently, this is like a stylist's wet dream. Apparently, the panel layout throughout this comic is just... Everyone celebrates it.
Yeah.
The way that it uses space.
I read this interview with Barry Windsor Smith many years ago.
Barry Windsor Smith. And
he said, this is at the Comics Journal, and he made this bizarre statement, which I thought it was ridiculous, but he said, women, he's talking about how there were few women readers in comics compared to male readers. And he says, I think they just don't get it somehow. And he says, I think that it's like they start reading from the center of the page. And for years I was like, what is he talking? This is nonsense. And then I saw this and I was like, wait a second, maybe he's onto something.
Because this is
where you look at the whole design first of the page, and then you start reading it in order, or something like that. You know, I'm still not convinced that any of that is true.
It does seem
for a second.
It does seem a coincidence.
But it's a coincidence that yes, there is some kind of lineup there. Because I'd never seen anything like I'd never seen shoujo manga before I read that interview.
So I think Ikeda is an enormously impressive person.
She became a professional singer, by the way.
I heard that
later in life.
In the 2000s.
Yes, like around 2000.
30 years after her incredibly successful caeer as a mangaka.
She became a professional singer.
It's that just blows my mind. Like, she's an immensely impressive figure, and this is a deeply impressive work of art. In terms of its research, in terms of its artistry, in terms of its impact. I'm just never going to read it again.
Yeah, that is fair. 100% fair. And in fact, I don't know when I'm going to get to the later volumes. It might be after I retire or something, or when I can manage to find them in some shop, or, yes, but 100% fair. Okay, the movie.
No! Nay!
Yeah,
This movie's a disaster!
Yeah, what a mess. A bland mess. Okay.
It's so bland, as we said. It's so boring. It's quite long. It's about 2 hours long.
It's 2 hours.
Everything's rushed through.
It's just one line. Like one line about Madame du Barry, one line about you have to join the revolution, one line about this or that, and then it's on to the next thing.
It's checking all these boxes.
Yes.
And yet they just don't know what else to do with it.
Yeah.
Except say, here's what happened in this year. Here's what happened in the comic when the comic was set in this year.
Yeah.
Next scene.
Yeah.
And it could have been shot, as you said, if someone like Baz Luhrmann, Sofia Coppola, even Mario Bava...
Yeah.
He could have done something incredible with this source material.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised...
Somebody that could understand... We're spilling over into adaptation here.
You're right. So let's go on to adaptation then. I wouldn't be surprised if Demy never even looked at a page of the comic.
I agree. Because it seems like if you read this comic, even you who wouldn't read any more of it has an impression of what's going on visually and the level of intensity of it and the emotional feeling you get page to page on this comic.
Yep.
And
I don't know how you could read this and then direct something like Demy direct. I think he was given the translation. I think he got a script.
He got a script and he directed the script.
And he never saw a page of this work.
No.
Which is pretty much... sums up adaptation.
Yes, yeah, hard nay.
Okay,
please like, rate, review, subscribe. Please visit us on Facebook. Please join our Patreon.
Please.
Because these Rose of Versailles books are expensive. So this is part of my personal collection. I've owned this anyway, so. But we do need supporters for the hosting fees and other books and DVDs and things.
We want to read that original script for Superman 1978.
Yes, exactly.
We want to get that from Dartmouth University.
Yes. And next week, we'll be doing Red Rider. Now, there are 26, 27, 28, 27...
Between 26 and 28 Red Rider
I don't think they're
movies.
28 because I think Blondie has a record at 28.
Right.
So I think it's 27.
Maximum
or
of
maybe
27.
26. Max 27 Red Rider movies. I believe like 23 of them were produced by one studio.
And the rest
15
by
had
another.
one actor. Then there were 7 with another actor. Then another studio got the rights, and they're like, we're going to keep doing them. They made 4. These were all done between like 1944 and 1947. So it's essentially like a TV series. They're all about 1 hour long. They're 55 minutes. Yeah. Most of them are on YouTube. Now, what we've decided is we're going to try to do...
For our sins, we're going to watch 3.
We're going to watch 3. Because I was like, isn't it going to be unfair to one of the actors if we leave one out?
So,
So we're going to do Marshal of Reno, which is, I think, the second. These are all on YouTube. I couldn't find the first one on YouTube, so we're not doing the very first one.
Right.
We're doing Marshal of Reno. We're doing Stagecoach to Denver, which is the next actor's first movie. And we're doing Ride, Rider, Ride, which is the first of the second studio. Third actor. Switch to color, I believe. And maybe they switch to color at the end of I don't know. We might figure some of this
We'll try and
out.
find out.
We're going to try to... We might not even watch all 3. And also, this is our special Christmas episode for reasons which maybe are clear already to some listeners or will become clear by next week.
See you then.
Okay.